It was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime. Hope Hicks was attending the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, and she was excited to embark on her sea-year voyage abroad. She was one of only a handful of women at the academy, and she was eager to prove herself in the male-dominated world of commercial shipping. But her adventure soon turned into a nightmare when Hope was raped by the ship's officer, who she says took advantage of her vulnerability and isolation on the ship. She tried to report the assault, but she faced resistance from the very authorities who were supposed to protect her, and when she did finally speak out, she faced disbelief and pushback from those in power. Hope's story is way too common. Women who enter male-dominated fields often face barriers and obstacles that their male colleagues do not. And when they are victims of sexual assault or harassment, they're often ignored, disbelieved, or even punished for speaking out. But Hope refused to stay silent. She became a vocal advocate for survivors everywhere, using her own experience to shed light on the problems facing women in the maritime industry and beyond. And despite the many challenges that she faced, she persevered in her quest for justice and accountability. Her story is a powerful reminder that we must continue to fight for the rights of women and survivors everywhere. And by learning from her experience, we can work to create a safer and more equitable world for everyone. If you're new here, I'm Justina. I'm an empowerment self-defense coach and founder of Rise Self-Protection. I hope that by exploring Hope's story and discussing these important issues, we can all learn and grow together and work towards creating a safer and more equitable world for all of us. So let's get started. First, I want to talk to you about the strategies that are used to carry out these types of crimes. In this case, the perpetrator was not a stranger. He was a shipmate with whom she had to spend several months at sea. So I want to talk to you about the specific tactics non-stranger predators use to gain access to their targets. Research shows that the majority of sexual assaults are committed by someone the target knows, making it all the more important for individuals to be aware of the phases of attack that non-strangers may use. The first phase is the intrusion phase, where the perpetrator may make comments or engage in inappropriate behavior to gauge the victim's reaction. In Hope's case, the perpetrator made comments about women not belonging on ships and insisted on showing her risque photos of women he had allegedly dated. If the target does not assert themselves or the predator does not respect the boundaries, the desensitization phase begins. Once the predator has identified vulnerabilities, they'll continue to push the limits, often attempting to make the intrusive behavior seem commonplace. Drugs and alcohol are two of the most common tools used to facilitate assault because they work to both embolden the predator and desensitize the target. The third phase is isolation. This can involve the predator creating situations where they are alone with the target or around others who they feel will accept the behavior. Finally, in the execution phase, the predator may use physical force or threats to carry out the assault. There are often distinct differences between how non-strangers and strangers approach their targets. Non-strangers, such as acquaintances or intimate partners, typically use instrumental violence, while strangers often employ gratuitous violence. Understanding these differences can help us better identify potentially dangerous situations and protect ourselves from harm. Okay, so instrumental violence is characterized by the use of just enough force to control the target. This type of violence is often employed by non-strangers who rely on their pre-existing relationship with the target to maintain control. They might use subtle threats, drugs, alcohol, coercion, or manipulation to maintain power over the victim rather than resorting to excessive physical force. So for example, an abusive partner may use emotional manipulation or the threat of violence to keep their partner in line without actually resorting to physical violence unless absolutely necessary. In contrast, strangers typically use gratuitous violence, which is characterized by overwhelming force aimed at intimidating or overpowering the target. Strangers don't have a pre-existing relationship with the victim, therefore they need to rely on force to establish control. This type of violence is often much more brutal than instrumental violence. Being aware of these differences in violence tactics can help us recognize warning signs and develop strategies for dealing with potential threats. In the case of non-strangers, it's essential to pay attention to changes in behavior, subtle threats, and attempts at manipulation. Identifying these phases and setting boundaries early can often lower the risk of non-stranger perpetrators gaining access to you. This includes asserting oneself in the testing phase and speaking up if behavior or comments are inappropriate, as well as being aware of situations where the perpetrator may be trying to target you. Hope Hicks' experience with her rapist highlights the difficulties of setting boundaries with authority figures, especially in male-dominated industries. The officer, who had power and authority over Hope, had a duty to protect her, but instead, he violated her trust and took advantage of her vulnerability. This case is not unique. Unfortunately, many women face similar challenges when it comes to setting boundaries with authority figures. It can be especially difficult in male-dominated industries where women are often outnumbered and their voices are not heard. Women may feel pressure to go along with inappropriate behavior or advances to avoid retaliation or harm to their careers. And the power dynamics at play can make it especially challenging to speak out and seek justice. Not to mention, when women do speak out, they're often met with disbelief, ridicule, or backlash. They may be accused of lying, exaggerating, or misunderstanding the situation. And this can be incredibly damaging to their well-being and make it even harder for them to set boundaries in the future. Many survivors of sexual violence choose not to report their assaults due to the fear of not being believed, and those who do report often face scrutiny, victim blaming, and disbelief from law enforcement, their communities, and even their own friends and family members. This disbelief can exacerbate the trauma that survivors experience, leading to feelings of shame, guilt, and isolation. In the case of Hope, she struggled for months with the decision to come forward about her story of sexual assault. And when she finally did, she was met with resistance from those in power, including her school. She was even told to remove her work as a victims advocate from her resume because it might make people in the industry feel uncomfortable. The fear of retaliation, shame, and disbelief often leads many survivors of sexual assault to remain silent about their experiences. This hesitance to come forward highlights a deeply rooted problem in our society that needs to be urgently addressed. The fact that many survivors feel unable to report their assaults points to a systemic failure to provide adequate support and protection. Society must acknowledge the prevalence and impact of sexual assault and take active steps to create safe spaces for survivors to share their experiences without the fear of retaliation or stigma. I think an essential component of addressing this issue is reforming the current legal system to ensure that survivors are believed and receive the justice that they deserve. And resources and support for survivors needs to be increased throughout the legal process. Workplaces and educational institutions must also adopt proactive measures to prevent sexual assault from occurring in the first place. Policies and training programs that promote respectful and healthy relationships, reporting mechanisms for survivors, and accountability for perpetrators are all necessary steps in fostering an environment where survivors feel empowered to speak out. The hesitance of survivors like Hope to report their assault highlights a dire need for societal change. Hope's story sheds light on important lessons about self-defense, women's empowerment, boundary setting, and predator psychology. Here are a few takeaways. While self-defense techniques can be helpful, it's important to remember that they are not a guarantee of safety. Survivors of sexual assault are not responsible for preventing their own assaults. We need to focus on changing the culture that allows these crimes to happen in the first place. It's crucial that we empower women to speak up and set boundaries when they feel uncomfortable or unsafe. Setting boundaries can be especially difficult in situations where the other person holds power over you, such as a boss or a teacher. However, it's important to remember that you have the right to set boundaries and that you're not obligated to do anything that makes you feel uncomfortable. Overall, Hope Hicks' story underscores the importance of addressing sexual assault and harassment at all levels. The case of Hope and her experience with sexual assault during her time at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy sheds light on the larger issues of power dynamics, survivor credibility, and difficulty of reporting sexual assault. The problems surrounding these issues are complex and multi-layered, but it's important that we continue to have an open and honest conversation in order to affect change. As individuals, we can work towards empowering survivors by believing and supporting them, and by educating ourselves and those around us about the realities of sexual assault. We can also work towards setting clear boundaries with authority figures and recognizing the phases of attack that non-strangers use to gain access to their targets. Additionally, we can advocate for systemic change by supporting legislation that improves reporting and accountability measures for sexual assault, and by pushing for companies and organizations to take concrete steps to prevent and address sexual misconduct. Ultimately, we must work together towards a culture that does not tolerate sexual assault and prioritizes all individuals' safety and well-being. Only then can we hope to create a world where survivors are believed, perpetrators are held accountable, and instances of sexual assault become a thing of the past. So I want to know what you think. How can we shift societal attitudes and norms to reduce the prevalence of sexual violence? Let me know in the comments so we can talk about it, and I'll see you in the next video. Don't forget to share this video with a sister in your life because they need to know.